best way to put it. So, today we're going to do something very, very interesting. Loren Coleman, you remember Loren, of course, from Mysterious America, from his work on Bigfoot. We've had some fascinating sessions with Loren on Dreamland. Now, a departure for Loren Coleman, and a very, very important one. How the media and popular culture trigger the mayhem in tomorrow's headlines. This is the kind of on-target insight that we urgently need. You haven't seen any reviews of his book, The Copycat Effect. Of course not, because this book takes out a Sten gun and fires it at the media exactly, Loren, what the media is causing people to do to us, and they don't want us to think about that. They want us to continue to buy into this constant diet of violence and fright and fear that is actually taking our culture down. It's like having a noose around your neck these days to watch the news. How do you feel about that, Loren?
I think that's true. It's in The Copycat Effect, I really look at how the media has used death and near-death experiences graphically depicted on their television, on radio, to sell. And I think that if we look at that clearly, we can see that they are actually behind a lot of behavior contagion, murder, suicides, everything from the beheadings that we're reading about. I'm not blaming them, but I'm saying they're creating a culture where vulnerable people, where people that have homicidal intent, tend to get a lot of their ideas now from what they see 24/7 on the cable news.
And this goes a lot deeper, folks, than you would think. Now, when he said near-death, by the way, he wasn't referring to the type of near-death experiences we think about. He was referring to accidents and tragedies. Am I right about that, Loren?
Yes, indeed. I am talking about how if you turn on the news or look at any kind of media, it's about death or near-death. What I mean is hurricanes, tornadoes, even talk of influenza is really about whether or not you're going to die or live this winter.
Now, the book, let's talk a little bit about the 911 connection, which was kind of an eye-popping, mind-boggling one for me when I first opened the book.
Well, I think I want to really make people stand up and sit up, because right at the beginning of the book, I talk about an incident that I think a lot of people have forgotten. In 1994, on September 11th, a plane was stolen and actually used to crash into the White House. It's a date and an incident that people have forgotten. Because of that incident, a man had stolen a Cessna, taken off, flown over the Masonic Washington Monument, down the area there, and right into the White House. Because of that, and because it got so much media attention, for the next month, you had 5 different incidents occurring at the White House, where there were different people shooting guns, invading it, climbing over the fences, and it really became something. So that 9/11 really 10 years ago now occurred. I also talk about 9/11 in other cases. I don't know if you want to get into those right now.
Sure, absolutely. I want to get into lots of cases. That's why we're here.
Okay.
I'm delighted.
Right. Well, I think what is intriguing is that if you look deeper and deeper at the significance of 11, for instance, the Madrid subway bombings occurred exactly with 911 days in between 9/11 and that date in which the bomb exploded in Madrid. And it was done with 11 different bombs with 110 pounds of dynamite. If you look at the background of the 9/11 situation, it occurred because the planning had happened in the Philippines, and it first started on December 11th, which they wanted to take 11 planes down. For whatever reason, 11 is significant in there, and it's almost as if the intelligence, we're all talking about the intelligence agencies making mistakes, but I think that there's probably been a lot out there about 11 that could have prevented or maybe predicted some of this stuff.
Okay, well, that gets me to a question, Loren, because I have to ask you, we're talking about the private plane seemingly totally disconnected with all of this in 1994 going into the White House on September 11th. Then roll forward to September 11th, 2001, and that happens. Then we're talking about all of these other number 11s. Now, what are you saying here? Are you saying that there is somebody using the number 11 as a kind of code, or does it go deeper than that?
I think there's a few things going on, of course. One thing is that there is a twilight language, as I call it in the book, that really is beneath what is normally spoken to you as a reader of the media. In other words, 9/11 is important, but behind the 9/11 was September 11th, 1922, when Palestine began, or the Black September movement, which started really around September 11th in 1970. After the September 11th, 1994 situation, you had Ramses Yousef, who was involved with the Twin Towers bombing in 1993, really was the mastermind behind the destruction of the Philippines Flight 434 on December 11th, 1994, where he wanted to bomb. That was the first plot to bomb 11 planes, and of course,
434 adds up to 11.
Yeah, and out of those plots and plans came 9/11, and it just keeps coming up. I show in the book how the Bali nightclub explosion really started on October 11th, 2002. 202 people died. October 11th was that's where they used 110 pounds of explosives. The Madrid situation was March 11th, and that was where you had the 911 days between 9/11 and March 11th, 2004. So for whatever reason, you have Flight 11 going into the Twin Towers, which are two situations that can be looked from far away as 11. I don't know what the significance is, and I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm just pointing to something goes on with anniversaries, with significant dates, and it becomes part of the copycat effect.
Now, I would like to talk a little bit more about the twilight language, because I was fascinated with this material here, and he says, you say this: twilight language concerns from psychology the hidden significance of locations, dates, and other signs; from religious studies the hidden symbolism that lies in the texture of the incidents; and from criminology the profiling insights that have revealed the ritualistic nature of certain crimes and violent incidents. It's almost as if the unconscious has a language and a plan of life that it is enacting in some way that isn't necessarily obvious to us on the surface. Does that, I wanted to ask you that question specifically. Is that going kind of in the direction, a right direction, or do you think I'm kind of off base?
No, you definitely have captured it. What it talks about is the psychic driving that occurs when certain incidents that are in the media really key off people. This twilight language is there. I mean, we can see it in Heaven's Gate, for instance, in which that occurred on, a lot of the cult killings, cult suicides happen on the equinox, on the solstice, really keyed into something that has more meaning to them than it does to the general public. So if you take yourself one step back, and in a broader sense, when a lot of this media violence is put out there on a screen in almost a brainwashing situation, it really keys into a twilight language that has a different level of meaning to some people. Maybe they're called vulnerable, maybe they're called homicidal, but it certainly keys into almost a program. Maybe it's on a genetic level, maybe it's on a psychosocial level, whatever, that really creates violent situations that are driven along more and more by, seeing Columbine, seeing all the school shootings on TV.
Right.
It creates situations where people are copycatting in a very vivid way what's going on.
I am, I wouldn't say exactly a believer in traditional spirits, like things like the devil and so forth, but I do sense the very definite presence of these forces, both dark and light, and I'm a Christian because of the fact that not because I'm not an evangelical Christian, and I don't approve very much of the type of Christianity that you see in the media today. To me, it feeds evil and is filled with hate. I see Christianity as having to do with with trust in grace and living a life of forgiveness. But that's another story entirely. I do understand a lot about what Christ was as a being, and I understand why he would have been and why he would have been like that. I even pretty well understand why the image on the Shroud of Turin is likely to be an authentic side effect of the resurrection. Now, all of those things put aside, I wonder, and as I read your book, I began to sense, I can't articulate them, but I sensed patterns of meaning in my own mind, from my own experience of the incidents that you're talking about and of life, that seemed to me to imply the presence of a horrific plan that is where these dreadful images are put there like a kind of monstrous bait to draw us into a level of reality that we really should not go, that the way in which we look at evil in the world is making us evil. Now, I want you to comment on that, but not now, because now we have to take a little break. And folks, sure. I want you to think seriously about getting the Copycat Effect by Loren Coleman. This is important. This is not to be missed. This is to be thought about carefully, because this is, if there was ever a real lifeline to take you up out of a dark place that you don't even know you're in, here's one route out of the matrix, folks, the Copycat Effect. Okay. I'm telling you that. I'm guaranteeing you that. So get it, and please get it in your bookstore. Get it anywhere. And if you have half a brain, get it from the unknowncountry.com store so this whole shebang can keep shebanging along. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. Subscribers, you're going to hear 2 commercials during this program for the unknowncountry.com Christmas store, which is now very much open. In addition to the 5% discount you get for all purchases in our Christmas store over $25, your 10% automatic subscriber discount is added. So for purchases over $25, you get a 15% discount. It's really well worth doing. Plus, this program will not be more than 80 minutes long, so those of you who like to burn it onto a regular CD can do so and listen in your car. Well, it's that special time of year again when we start thinking of others and of each other in a very special way. We can make something out of Christmas by thinking carefully about those we love. What kind of a gift would really matter? What would open their minds? What would lift their spirits up? Well, one place to find such a gift, the best place, is the unknowncountry.com store. Go to the unknowncountry.com store, the new Christmas section, 5% off all orders above $25, plus our great discounts, plus if you're a subscriber, your additional automatic 10% discount. How can you miss? Go to the unknowncountry.com Christmas store right now. Give a gift that's really worth giving and worth getting from among our wonderful selections. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. I'm back with Loren Coleman, and we've been talking about his book, The Copycat Effect, and the inner meaning, as it were, of the media and its grinding, terrible fascination with evil and what it is doing to infect us with it. Loren, how do you respond to what I said before the break about the possibility of some conscious presence being there? I'm curious.
Well, Whitley, you said some very powerful things, and I think in a measured way, I want to make sure that I really respond to this. My whole book really looks at what is occurring in our culture around the media. A very negative, violent media is creating more negative violence. And I feel that there's room and time for us to say, we want a positive choice. We want to change things. It's not too late. Whether or not there's a grand plan behind it, I don't use the word evil or blame in the book. I present the information, and I want people to start thinking for themselves that just because it's on the media or in the newspapers, they don't have to let it sink in. And it is creating an atmosphere of violence and evil. I definitely agree with what you're saying, and I think that I didn't let other countries off the hook. In India, more and more people are burning themselves alive to get raises from their work or because the soccer team doesn't want to play a game. In Eastern European countries, people are creating suicides by burning themselves alive as well. In other countries, we know now that the evil of beheadings are getting created daily. And I feel that in a very specific cause and effect way, that those actions are being reinforced by the media, reinforced everywhere from the internet where people are putting up, the tapes of the beheadings to it being a nightly thing that individuals talk about. So I'm not sure if there's a grand plan or if it's the Antichrist or if there's evil behind it, but the evidence, the results are certainly extremely negative. I talk at the end of the book about how we have to start thinking about our children and our futures.
Yes, exactly why I have you on, because this is the key, folks. Let's get to it. Go ahead.
And I think that most of our lives are pretty mundane. There are accidents and there's curious things that do happen to all of us. But most of our lives go along. Most people, for instance, in this country feel that if they look at the media, they think there's murders and killings all the time. But we know there's 75% more suicides than there are homicides. And that's just devastating. Devastating that most of the people in this country are taking their own lives, and it's not other people killing other people. But most of our lives aren't touched by that. We have very positive things occur to us, and the media is not talking about that. I do mention in the book that, sure, the media loves sex, for titillation and distraction, but if they can go back to a story in which someone's nearly died or there's an assassination or a car chase, they'll do that.
Well, let's get now down to some specifics. And you've touched on the waves of suicides, and I'd like to talk a little bit about specifically one subject you deal with extensively in the book, which is teen suicides and the way they come in waves. Tell us and why that is, and tell us a little bit about this. And then I want to get into the whole issue of violence in our children and the way intricate and more terrible violence is coming into society at a younger and younger age, and what we can do about this.
Right. We know that kids as young as 3 and 4 are killing themselves, and we know that teen suicide is a major problem in the United States. For every 5 completed suicides, 4 of those are young men. And for every 100 suicides attempts, 90 of those are women. And young men are using guns more and more. But what is unknown to most people, of course, is that females die by guns at an alarming rate too. 50% of the deaths are by guns for both men and women. And it does come in waves. I talk it in terms of a word that I used in a book in 1987, suicide clusters, and really talk about it again here in the Copycat Effect.
Right.
For a long time, the media ignored and denied that suicide clusters actually exist, but we know now that through different communities, through different schools, you'll have waves of suicide occurring. Usually it's exactly the same aged person. Somebody may be 14 years old, a young man dying by hanging. 3 weeks later, you have another 14-year-old young male dying by hanging. And it really is a copycat situation. They maybe don't know each other, but they know each other through the media or through word of mouth, and it becomes an option that is presented in front of the vulnerable, angry teenager. And it happens over and over again. And I see it as, there's many factors, of course, but isolation and no communication. 2 major factors. It's overdone by the medical establishment that it's depression. It's really around despondency. It's around the pain in these people's lives. But as you know, all of us go through painful times, and all of us have stress. But for some reason, there are groups of kids that are choosing suicide, and we need to really look at that. What I really try to talk about in the book and do talk about is how the media has become part of this. If you'll notice, during the 1980s, teen suicide clusters were all across the country. And all of a sudden, in 1996, in Moses Lake, Washington, a young man walks into a schoolroom, shoots his algebra teacher in the back of the head, turns to the classroom, turns around and says, "That sure beats algebra, doesn't it?" An exact quote from Stephen King's book, Rage. And that model from that book was used approximately 4 times in school shootings. And
I wonder how Stephen King would react to that. I'm tempted to ask him.
Well, he reacted after Columbine. He finally got it, and he withdrew that book, the first Stephen King book ever withdrawn from publication. You can't find one for less than $350 on, auctions, online auctions. It's a book that he's not proud of now, and he understands the copycat effect. But what happened?
That is impressive.
Yeah. And he really understood he did not want to have any responsibility for any kid copying that sort of murder out of his book. And indeed what happened then is you have a copycat effect from that novel. Then the media took that incident in Washington State and for 24 hours, 48 hours, broadcast it on the news. The next, a few months later, an exact copy of that in another classroom across the country. So much so that I track in the book, and I have a chart in the back of the book of all these incidents.
Of the way they work together, folks, and it is really illuminating. Go ahead.
And you can actually see the progression and the increase. It's horrifying. It's so horrifying.
It is absolutely. That is absolutely correct. It is horrifying. And now it's one thing for us to say it's horrifying, Loren, but you also go into a lot, and I want to talk in this context in terms of the Wind River incident, of stuff that can be done. We can do things. We don't have to have this. It doesn't have to be this way. If it's going to stay this way in the larger context of the whole country or the world, fine, but not in your life and mine. Is that right?
Exactly. And the Wind River situation where Shoshone young men were killing themselves, and it was a few months into the cluster that was going on when people started noticing that all of the pallbearers for the first individual's funeral were starting to kill themselves. People started to look at that, but they also did a ritual. They went back to their native culture. They did rituals with feathers and with native traditions, and tried to get back to the community. And that seems to be what really pulls some of these clusters away from death. People start gathering together, they start grieving as opposed to glorifying or memorializing the death. The large group assemblies, right. the marble benches really backfire. But when people get in small groups or they start looking at their culture, or children start talking to other individuals that are interested in this as well as parents, then you get a lot more positive energy out of all of it. And
tell us what happened when the Shoshone elders, they understood this. They understood this deeply. What happened when the media showed up from Salt Lake City, I believe?
Well, the media showed up, I believe it was at a cemetery, and the elders just completely got their guns out and told them to skedaddle. They did not want the invasion of privacy. They did not want the media to do what they'd done other places, which is to make a mockery of this and to use it to sell, Sweeps Week. So to spread the copycat effect, conceivably, to reservations all across the country. Exactly. So the elders certainly got a hold of that situation, and they got in control of it. And what I recommend, and I do consult around the country about this, is to tell communities and schools to start thinking about their school as a community, and they should make sure that the borders and boundaries of their school, that the media are not allowed to establish a foothold and to actually bushwhack kids as they come out of school and interview them for their 6 o'clock news.
Right, to spread the cancer.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, it's exactly. Think of it as this: it's a cancerous tumor, and what spreads the cancer is these groups of people who are out making money off of the suffering of others. Now, this gets me to my next question, and we're coming up on a little break, And I'm going to tell you again, the Copycat Effect, it's important for you to know this. It's important for your kids and your grandkids to understand this, and your knowledge and your calm, clear understanding is the key to successfully insulating your family from the Copycat Effect. That's why you need the book. Get it. Get it from unknowncountry.com. Get it anywhere. But get it. And another thing about it, forget reading reviews about it. We're going to talk about that too. The media doesn't want you to get this book. They don't want you to buy it. All the more reason you need this baby. Okay, we'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber's Dreamland. Well, it's that special time of year again when we start thinking of others and of each other in a very special way. We can make something out of Christmas by thinking carefully about those we love. What kind of a gift would really matter? What would open their minds? What would lift their spirits up? Well, one place to find such a gift, the best place, is the unknowncountry.com store. Go to the unknowncountry.com store, the new Christmas section, 5% off all orders above $25, plus our great discounts, plus if you're a subscriber, your additional automatic 10% discount. How can you miss? Go to the unknowncountry.com Christmas store right now. Give a gift that's really worth giving and worth getting from among our wonderful selections. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We're back with Loren Coleman talking about the Copycat Effect. You know, we've had a few books on the show over the years about the media and problems with the media. And the media is a big, big problem. But I have to ask you this question, Loren. If things like this aren't news, or they are news, that's obvious. They are news. Mm-hmm. How can they be handled in such a way that they're reported without spreading this cancer? Because they're going to be reported one way or another, I'm sure.
Right. And I spent the whole last chapter of the book really looking at the recommendations and alternatives to this. I am not for censorship. I believe in, actually am part of a very open press in the United States and in North America. But we need to start looking at graphic depictions of these violent suicide, murder-suicide situations that have no basis other than to titillate, to sell products. If you're looking at and trying to report on a suicide cluster in your community, for instance, you can talk about the respectful grieving that's going on, or you can talk about the hotlines that people are doing. But you don't need to go into, blow by blow, which I've read some of these stories where they talk about the gun was put to his head and he tried 2 times and then the bullet went off and it went through this part of his brain. I mean, it is incredible how some media actually set up roadmaps. There was a recent incident where there was some bomb threats being given at one school, and the media the next day came online and they said, well, we went on the internet and we found out how they're making tennis ball bombs, and here's the recipe that they use. And it gave the recipe and formula and the blueprints for creating tennis ball bombs. And so in the next 2 days, tennis ball bombs showed up in that school. It's just, it floors me how the media can think that they get away with this.
And, in the book, there are a couple of very wise recommendations.
Right.
The media must be more aware of the power of their words. And I want to ask you this, Loren. Sure. I know a lot of people in the media, and I know they are aware of the power of their words, and that's why they they work so hard and so skillfully to maximize the shock effect in order to get bigger ratings. It's a sick field it's the sickest business in the United States, no question, next to video games. A very sick business. Now, given that they do know, assuming they do know, where do we go without getting involved in censorship to convince them not to misuse the power of the words, which they know how to do so well?
Right. Well, it does. The CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, put out some media guidelines for suicide about 20 years ago, and it's still been an uphill battle. So I'm hoping my book, if the right people read it, there's things like calling, using the word successful. There was a successful suicide in town, or there was a failed attempt, or even using the words rampage or epidemic in headlines. Now, it's going to be harder to get people to quit using rampage and epidemic, but if all the media people that have allowed me to talk to them, editors of newspapers and some broadcasters, when I say, we want successful grades, we want successful relationships, we even want our kids to be successful in sports, but why would you use successful along with suicide? And all of a sudden this light goes on in their head, and I think I got through to one person. Actually, I was at a local media situation, a local TV station that did a little public affairs interview of me, and off air, the interviewer, who was a young woman from Minnesota, and she's been brought out here, she was arguing that, we never talk about suicides on TV. And I said, did you talk about Kurt Cobain? Did you talk about that suicide bombing this morning? And then as I was walking out of the station, a producer ran over to me and she said, I've been in this business for 25 years and everything you said in the book is right. And so I felt vindicated, even though I had to be a little defensive on air.
Now, I must say that one of the things that attracted me to the book and my concern about it, what's happening with it in the first place, is a letter from you saying that it's not really getting the attention you think it deserves. And I want to talk a little bit about that, because I think that the media sees this as something that, in their arrogance, they just don't want. They want to blow off, because they care at Fox News and CNN and ABC and right down to your local news organization. They care about one thing: bottom line ratings. What did we get tonight versus the competition? This is what they live or die on. And if they have to say that, if they have to zoom in on a bullet hole in the head of a 3-year-old child and then take a long, long look at the agony of the mother on television in order to get that rating, Loren, why aren't they going to do it? They are going to do it, and it's going to get worse. And this spiral, this downward spiral, our airplane is spinning out, man. It's crashing, and it's going down into this nexus of evil. Loren, help us.
I know. It is. It's a hard battle, and I'm not sure. In 1987, when I wrote my book, Suicide Clusters, it was a calm book that tried to make people aware of teen suicide. I got a lot of media attention. Newspapers, large newspapers, did reviews of it. I was on the Larry King Show and different things like this. This book comes along, and all of a sudden I'm getting shut out, because what I say in the book is, yes, we have a problem with suicide. Yes, we have a problem with murder-suicide, but you are putting your camera on these things and setting up models for people to behave tomorrow. You have a school shooting, and 3 days later you have a workplace rampage. Academic research in the last 23 years proves that the copycat effect exists, and you have been ignoring it, and you have been pushing it along. It's time to stop. It's time to wake up. The media does not want to hear that. And so I need to get to the public. I need to get, because it's not just the people on the other side of the camera, on the other side of the screen or the newspaper. It's the public that's going to change this. And it's going to have to be through a positive copycat effect. And that's what I really want to get out there as a good virus to change things that are going on.
Okay, there's nothing better than a good virus. How would it work?
How would it work? Well, I think we need to stop buying it. We need to, I think that those people that are interested in this will become the journalists someday, and it will change over. I've seen it in other fields. My whole other interest in the nature of mysteries for humankind, for anthropology, has slowly seen an awareness grow. So I'm hoping through just awareness, through changing, through some of these, talking on and on to people, it's amazing that people in suicidology are very excited by this book, and they're actually giving me some forums at some conferences and some other places which were kind of closed out before. And those
that is good news.
Those people that have lost individuals to suicide are very open to this, and they know that in a small community, the Copycat Effect certainly has a great impact. And also, I don't know how many people watch sports, but I occasionally watch sports, and in the last few days, I've seen nothing but brawls, the fights in the stands. And, of course, the media loves this, so once again, the next day they're going to show a football fight.
Yeah, it's a perfect example. A brutal brawl at the Pistons-Pacers game, ugly as sin, mean as a snake, vicious as it could be, and it was literally like a waltz, a dance with the media. They are all over it, close-up after close-up after close-up. And the NBA is left in the position of saying, we want our players to be role models for American youth. And then what the media does is it ignores all of the great stuff that basketball players actually do in the world, and every single team has great programs for young people. Every NBA team does. This happens, and that is in a single night, all undone by a bunch of idiots who I devoutly hope are barred from basketball forever. But mostly, the way the media massaged this, showing close-up after close-up of the actual punches, was disgusting. It made my blood run cold.
And then
of course, I read The Copycat Effect is the reason.
Right. And then within 24 hours, what did you see from the college football games? A fight between Clemson and South Carolina that went on and on and on.
Exactly. And it happened, and there will be more. And then when another thing you see, one thing about American sports that's cool is fans don't fight, and there are very few riots. If you went to a soccer game in the UK wearing the colors of the rival team and sat on the wrong side, you could get killed. You could get killed on practically any country in the world. United States, you routinely will go to baseball games. We're Yankees fans in our family. We'll go to the Angels wearing our Yankees stuff and sit with other Angels fans. The Angels might have a heartbreaking loss. We walk out. Nobody thinks twice about it. But folks, the media would like to change that. They'd like us to get killed so they'd have something to put on the news. Am I right or wrong about that, Loren? Now, we're going to take a break right now. But that's a crucial question. Do they want it to be as ugly as possible? Are they looking to use and to create more violence with what they do in order to juice their ratings even more? I mean,
Of course they are.
Of course they are. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Loren Coleman's book, The Copycat Effect. Don't blow it off. You need this. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. This is Whitley Strieber, It's Dreamland. We're talking to Loren Coleman about his book, The Copycat Effect, and about the way the media is actually increasing the amount of violence in our society by the way they transmit and communicate it to us. So let me ask you this. We were just talking about some recent big-time sports violence and how it was beginning to build, and I made the point the media wants to make it as ugly as possible in order to juice ratings and create more violence. And you sort of agreed with me. How true do you think that is?
Well, I think we're seeing a shift. If you'll notice, it was in Major League Baseball. You'd be watching a Major League Baseball game on TV, and there would be a fight in the stands, or somebody with no clothing on would jump onto the field, and all of a sudden the game stops, and you keep seeing the batter standing there, and the announcers come on and they say, we don't want to turn the cameras in that direction because we don't want to encourage that behavior.
That's right, and that comes from Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball has a mandate that the cameras will not go on fan violence, etc.
But what are they telling you behind that? What they're telling you behind that is they know the Copycat Effect does work.
Right.
That in fact, if they kept showing these, they would increase the level of violence at sporting events. And now you have the shift. Everybody is talking about this incident at the NBA game. The next day they show a football game, And then they went over and they dug out all the tapes for the last 20 years and showed every fight that they had, the White Sox games and the Royals games and all of those. You are going to see
and the Yankees-Boston games, which there have been many.
Right.
Boston lost all the fights too, except. By the way, for you Boston fans, I never want to hear about the curse again. The curse is over. Okay, let's go ahead.
Definitely is. So you have a situation in which it's obvious it doesn't take any brains to predict in the next few weeks we're going to see more and more sport fights happening. They're going to be broadcast. There's going to be cameras there. These two teams, the Pacers and the Pistons, are going to meet again on Christmas. Do you think there's going to be media from all over the world there? Of course there are. What are they going to wait for? They're going to wait for any little incident, and it's going to be all blown out of proportion.
Right.
And it sells. That's what they want it for. It sells, and there's absolutely no conscience to it.
Now, of course, one is tempted, sorely tempted, to see this is breaking the heart of our world. It is part of what is making us so much meaner and so much crueler than we used to be. There was a time, this country, this world, is on a downhill path to ultra-violence. A story like The Clockwork Orange, written 30 or 40 years ago, was predictive of our era and right beyond it. Now, the second thing Loren talks about in his recommendations, the thing that's good about this book is this isn't just telling you the bad news. He lays out what we need to do to fix this, and it's fixable. It's fixable without censorship. It is fixable by insisting that the media become responsible adults and stop acting like a bunch of mean little bullies. But the third one is very important, and the media must cease its graphic and sensationalized wall-to-wall commentary and coverage of violent acts and the details of the actual methods and places where they occur. Now, we were literally just talking about the perverted love with which they presented the violence that occurred at that basketball game. Loren, what can we do to convince them that they got to stop doing this, because our children's future depends on it?
Well, we have to show them that it's not true. What they blame the public. They say this is what the public wants. The public wants O.J. Simpson coverage and wants Scott Peterson coverage. I don't know too many people that are really too thrilled with turning on their TV every night for news and having to hear about those same old stories or seeing this kind of coverage. There's probably people around the country that wanted to hear the scores for their sporting team, and all of a sudden they had to watch over and over again this fight. So I think that
I actually was one of them. I was waiting for the Knicks scores. I understand that being a Knicks fan is sort of like being among the Walking Dead these days, but who cares? Spike Lee is one too.
And I was waiting to see if Pedro goes to the Yankees, right?
Well, right. And instead we had to watch this crap.
Right. So I think that's one thing. We really need to move away and move back from this and let people know. I mean, all news is local, and it really starts with our local connections. We buy this, we buy that. And if people get to know what's going on, what's amazing about the school shootings is that although I'm not for censorship, occasionally natural experiments happen. After 9/11, there was no coverage of school shootings in this country because everything was Iraq, Afghanistan, and terrorism. So for a whole year, there was no coverage of a school shooting, and no school shootings happened. An amazing experiment.
Incredibly telling. That is telling. Listen to what he just said. No coverage of school shootings, no school shootings. Families whose children would have died, who would be living with that grief for the rest of their lives, are not, because media coverage that would have happened didn't.
It ceased. And it's happened across the world where there's been newspaper blackouts, or newspapers have gone on strike. And so we see this happen over and over again. So we need to let the media know that we're not happy with this, we're not going to buy their products, in whatever way. I don't exactly have the marketing solution down yet, but I certainly know it's something that we have to look at in terms of asking for more positive news, even news about unexplained phenomena. I think is much more fascinating than hearing about who got shot over, assassinated in some Asian country.
Certainly our website is testament to that, because it's gigantic and it's the place to go for real news of unexplained phenomena. But I want to just touch on something right now. It's the Heaven's Gate affair, where all of those people committed suicide. And it's not quite, you don't mention it in your book because it's not quite the copycat effect, but I felt an incredible feeling about that, because Art Bell and I were on the air with a gentleman who, I confess his name has slipped my mind, who was a professor from Emory or somewhere, who was saying about how this comet had a spaceship following it and a starship and all of this. And we were listening to him, and it turned out to be all a load of baloney. But nevertheless, people listening to it took it to heart and committed suicide in an effort to join the spaceship. And I'll tell you, Art, and I'm sure Art will agree, we felt that deeply. And we were so sad that we'd had this guy on, but it was such a fascinating and frankly fun story that we didn't really think anyone would take it to heart, let alone believe it. Coast to Coast was about exploring the crazy, wild edge of everything. But there's only one person responsible for a suicide, and that's the individual that takes the individual themselves. But still, you feel it. Yeah. Believe me, if you have a conscience.
Of course, definitely you feel it. But still, I think just to back up, and you said you didn't quite understand why it was in there with copycat. There are copycats that copycatted Heaven's Gate, and that if you read deeper in that chapter, you find more and more of cults that copied Jonestown, copied Heaven's Gate. But in addition, one of the reasons I put it in here is it's on two other levels. One, there's a twilight language that goes on with copycat.
Right, we talked about that earlier, and that's fascinating.
Right, and the other reason is that the brainwashing that occurs within a cult is exactly the same psychological technique that the media is using on all of the rest of us.
Where we're coming up on the end of the show, to where I wanted to go from the first moment we started talking. That, folks, you are members of a cult. You are members of the cult of the media, and you don't even know it. This book is about, you know what it's really about? It's about getting deprogrammed and learning how to deprogram your own family. Does that make sense to you, Loren?
Exactly what I say at the end of the book. If we can make this manifest, if we can explain this, then people can take a mediated reading and not be part of it, not be part of this cult of the media in which our lives are overwhelmed with the cult of death. And we really need to pull back and look at what we're really involved with.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, get the book and you learn, your husband, if your grandparents, and learn how to deprogram yourself and your family, because the media is going to go on doing this. You can see the big juggernaut that's out there. People like Loren will be making an earnest effort to change them. But the fact is, the change has to start in your own home. And it has to start with you waking up and sensitizing yourself to how this cult works and how the ultraviolence that is shown on the media draws you down. The Copycat Effect by Loren Coleman, one of the most important books that has come out in a long, long time, being hidden under a cover by the media because they don't want you to read it. They don't want you to leave the cult. Get out of the cult. Now, speaking of cults, one of my cults, and it's a good cult, is the cult of Linda Moulton Howe, who is going to be up next. And I always say, Linda Moulton Howe, wow, it's going to be something very, very special. You listen up, because you're going to get taken way out on the edge to a place where no other science reporter will go. but a place where they all should. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. It's been a pleasure having you on the program, Loren Coleman.
Thank you. All my prayers to Annie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Annie is recovering very well, and we're in a good place finally. The Copycat Effect, How the Media and Popular Culture Trigger the Mayhem in Tomorrow's Headlines by Loren Coleman. Get it. Get it at your local bookstore. Get it anywhere. Preferably, get it from the UnknownCountry.com bookstore. Hey, we're just as good as the other guys, and we're often a lot faster. And if you have any trouble with your order, we answer your questions. We don't just send you automatic emails. It's very personal at our store. So we'll be right back.
Thank you.
All right, get ready to get your mind completely blown by Linda Moulton Howe. As you know, she is the editor of EarthFiles.com, the world's best edge science website, bar none. She's an Emmy Award-winning reporter for a reason. She's a writer. She's absolutely terrific. And she is going to blow us out of the water with a case of a guy who believes, a scientist who believes he saw a time machine in a cave in Czechoslovakia. Now, get ready for this. First, we're going to hear about some extraordinary lights called the Dover Lights. Then we're going to Czechoslovakia on a trip you're never going to forget.
Thanks, Whitley. At the 2004 Eureka Springs, Arkansas UFO conference 3 weeks ago, we heard new reports about mysterious glowing objects down in the Piney River Valley that local residents there since at least the 1800s have called Dover Lights. This year at the conference, Ted Phillips, director of the Center for Physical Trace Research in Branson, Missouri, talked about his own recent encounter with the Dover Lights on March 26, 2004, at about 20 minutes past sunset, or 6 p.m. Central Time. In Eureka Springs, Ted showed a series of color photographs, which I now have at my website, www.earthfiles.com, in a report at the top of the headlines page about Ted Phillips' experience. Ted photographed as the lights appeared and changed patterns, starting with one moving.
Suddenly, this very odd-colored light just winked on, and covering a distance, I later was able to determine that from the photos and maps and so on, that these things were about 4,700 feet from me, and very near the bank of the river.
What do you mean by odd-colored light? What was odd?
The shade of red or violet. It's very difficult to describe. I've had a lot of UFO witnesses say this to me. I've not seen a color like this, and this it is extremely odd. In that it is a mixture of deep red and deep violet. The light source is very intense, but yet it is not hurtful to the eyes. It's almost a soft intense, if that's possible. And it does not evidently illuminate the area around it, because this thing was passing through trees, very low to the ground, at a really good clip. And that area, I've talked to another researcher who has actually been down there on foot, and he tells me that it is almost vertical bluffs, very dense trees, and so on. So you just wouldn't run screaming across there with a light of some kind or driving something. There are no roads or trails down in there. And but at any rate, the first light winks on. It moves rapidly across to the right, a distance I would estimate to be perhaps 100 feet. Suddenly stops, maintains position there, and about 20, 30 feet to its right, another one winks on. They are displaying two horizontally level lights parallel to each other. Then, below them, nearer the ground, a third light comes on, which creates a little sort of a triangle. And subsequently, over a period of 2 minutes, additional lights come on, which are visible in these images, which form almost, a rough, fairly large circle of lights. And from this circle, from the edge of the circle, there would be 1, 2, 3, up to 5 or 6. It was hard to tell the camera was seeing much better than I was. Several of these lights would come out of the circle, out of the edge of it, again to the right, off, perhaps 100, 150 feet, and stop. And in some of the images, you can actually see a couple of the objects, or a couple of the lights, ascending vertically. And I'm not sure how far they went because the shutter shut down before they had stopped. But they were leaving a luminous trail behind them in the vertical ascent. So there was horizontal and vertical action on the part of these things. And, the whole display went on for, almost 30 minutes. And there was a rather brutal thunderstorm coming in over the mountain, and I packed up my tent and fled.
Looking at the photos, I kept having the impression that maybe there was something there, solid or in the middle, and that it was invisible, and these lights were appearing around it.
That's an interesting point, because now I do know that the first one, moved in from the left to the right, and when it stopped, then light 2 and then light 3 came on, followed by the other series of lights. So if that were the case, then the first light came in independently to join with this circle of lights, which then was initiated. Then the other lights that were coming out and moving 100, 150 feet away from the circle were independent then once they left the circle, independent light sources. And they were all the same color, the same intensity. They didn't blink, they didn't dim. But the color and the display of the light was just very unusual, and nothing at all like, for example, the Joplin spook light, which I've seen and photographed many times, and a couple of the other spook lights that I've seen. They are of a much softer lighting illumination than these things. These were very intense, almost with the intensity of looking into a laser point, really. If someone was standing a distance away and turned a laser pin at you, that it would be kind of almost that intense. And the equipment that I have to take down there to do the proper work, for example, this was shooting with a 260 millimeter telephoto, and using film, and what I will be using when I go back will be a 4,000 millimeter with an astronomical CCD imaging device, and which is capable of rapid multiple exposures to bring up more detail and so on.
And in the did you say 260 millimeter with a 35 millimeter single reflex?
Yes.
And what was the speed of the film?
It was Fuji 800.
Fuji 800.
Right, and I started out running a 2-second exposure per frame. Then I wasn't quite sure of the lighting down there, and I wanted to bring up to skylight some of the ground details so I could then later determine the exact position of these things. So I went on up to then some 4-second, then some 6, and then some 8-second exposures. And which, as you can see by the images, which can be lightened up more, they do show a lot of the ground area around these things. And it was, at the time I was shooting those, it was pretty dark down there.
And the color that is in the photographs, is it close to what you saw with your eye?
No. And I've been a professional photographer for a good part of my life, most of it. And I'm not sure how you would duplicate that color, but I tried in printing those and shifting the colors a bit on some test images to duplicate it, and as of yet I haven't been able to come up with that precise shade. I don't know. I've just not seen that color before. But it's the violet part is what is really outstanding in my mind. It is such an odd variation of red into violet.
Ted Phillips also reported about his search for a large black, glassy object embedded inside a cave in Slovakia, a mystery that began in 1970 when he worked with astronomer J. Allen Hynek. More about that after this break. This is Linda Moulton Howe, reporter and editor of EarthFiles.com, reporting for Dreamland.
And this is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. The work of Linda Moulton Howe, the amazing work of Linda Moulton Howe, the world's greatest reporter of edge news and edge topics. She has got a website, earthfiles.com. Go there frequently. You will never forget what you find on earthfiles.com. The best website, the best reporting of its kind in the world. Linda Moulton Howe, earthfiles.com. Don't miss a single day.
Nearly 30 years ago, Ted Phillips was working closely with astronomer J. Allen Hynek, who consulted for the U.S. Air Force on Project Blue Book, and later founded the Center for UFO Studies. In 1970, Ted and Dr. Hynek met and talked with an engineer from Slovakia named Antonin Horak. The engineer showed Ted and Dr. Hynek a diary he had kept in October 1944 during World War II, when he and two other wounded soldiers hid in a cave in the Tatra Mountains south of Krakow, Poland. Desperate for food, Tony Horak began exploring one of the cave's long passages. He came upon what he called an astonishing man-made cylindrical object that had, quote, a black mirror surface, unquote. Below the object, he could hear machinery sounds and felt mild heat. Dr. Hynek thought that an expedition should be mounted to the Tatra Mountains and asked the young Ted Phillips to go seek out that cave and try to find the object so that it could be studied scientifically. Money was raised, but the Russian struggles with Czechoslovakia after the 1968 invasion interfered with Ted's traveling in 1970. Then, 29 years later, in 1999, Ted finally made his first trip to Slovakia with a research grant provided by Joe Firmich, then CEO of a California computer company. Incredibly, Ted could not find the small cave entrance. But after he returned to the United States, a Slovak contact sent him a pre-World War II map that matched more closely the map that Tony Horak had showed Ted and Dr. Hynek. So Ted returned to Slovakia in 2001 and finally found the entrance by nearly falling into it. Ted asked his Slovak guides to hang him upside down through the narrow entrance. Then Ted was able to see a long passageway as Tony Horak had described. But there had been a landslide inside that prevented Ted from getting further into the cave. Now Ted Phillips is determined to go back with mine engineers who can shore up the cave entrance and search for the cylinder with the black mirror surface. Ted has shared with me some photos of his latest trip and diary pages about the anomalous object drawn by Antonin Horak, and you can see them in Part 2 of this report at www.earthfiles.com. Here now is Ted Phillips, quoting from the original 1944 diary kept by engineer Antonin Horak while holed up in the Slovakian cave during World War II.
Here I quote again directly from the diary. When he came to the end of this long level passage, there was a crawlway. And I quote, "Crawling through and still kneeling, I froze in amazement. There stands something like a large black silo framed in white. Regaining breath, I thought that this is a bizarre natural wall or curtain of black salt or ice or lava. But I became perplexed and awestruck when I saw that it is a glass-smooth flank of a seemingly man-made structure which reaches into the rocks on all sides. Beautifully, cylindrically curved, it indicates a huge body with a diameter of about 25 meters. Where this structure and the rocks meet, large stalactites and stalagmites form that glittering white frame." And I remember very distinctly, because I wrote some notes, in 1970 during our discussion at the diary, I asked Tony, I said, "How could you best describe this material? What did it look like? And he wrote down his answer, and he said it was like a black mirror.
Huh.
No seams, no rivets, no blocks. He tried to break some fragments out with a pickaxe and couldn't scratch it. Even shot his military rifle into the side of this thing and couldn't make a scratch. And so as he stands there looking at this large expanse of this black material, he notes that there's a vertical slanted crack running down the front of it. And as he moves up closer to it, he sees that it might be possible to go through the bottom of the crack at the floor of the cave room. And after several attempts and several cuts, he finally disrobed and kind of dropped through it. It goes down at a sloping angle of about 40 degrees. And as he went through it, he could determine that that outer wall was about 7 feet thick. And as he popped free of the inside of the front wall, he rolled down an incline of limestone and into the back wall. And he found himself inside the artifact, which was shaped roughly like a fat crescent moon. And it extended upward about 12 degrees off of vertical for an undetermined distance. And he was never able, even with carbide light torches, to see anything like an end to it above him. So over the period of time, measuring and exploring this thing, he starts chipping away at the limestone that he's standing on, what to him is the floor, down in one of the corners of the crescent. And the limestone there is not as thick and hard. And after several days of digging and hammering, he broke through about 6,000 years of limestone deposit to find the skeleton of what was later identified by its teeth as a prehistoric cave bear inside the artifact, underneath 5,000-6,000 years of limestone deposit.
Which implies that whatever the black glassy object is at least that old.
It's extremely old. And the last prehistoric cave bear was killed 11,000 years ago. And the question that Tony posed, and you first think of, how did a 20-foot long bear get through a crack that a man who had not eaten for 4 days could barely wriggle through? And so was there a connection? And Tony broached this in the diary. Was there at some point a connection with the surface where the bear somehow fell in? But there was no, and I questioned him very closely about this, there was no surface debris around the skeleton of the bear or inside on this limestone deposit. But of even more interest is the bear was lying on a wavy grill which extended on down, which Tony felt was absolutely man-made. And it was a series of wavy parallel lines or material forming a vertical grill that went on down below his feet. And he placed his cheek against the grill work and could feel heat coming up through the grill work, and not a lot of heat, but enough to sense. And he could hear what he described as something like a large turbine in the distance. And you have to keep in mind, this man had been in mines most of his life. He was familiar with underground noises and sounds and situations.
And was an educated engineer.
A very educated engineer, yes. And so that is incredibly significant. Not that the artifact is not equally incredible, but that something was still evidently going on of some nature. And so what was interesting is, in my last trip over there, before I found the cave, I knew I was in the general area, pretty close. I mean, it had to be fairly close. And I noticed as I went through this one particular area on the mountain that battery-powered devices would either just go nuts or would shut down. And believe me, there is nothing out there. There are no power lines for, I couldn't guess how many miles. No structures, no humans. I don't think there are many animals. There are snakes, but that's about it. And so on my next trip in, I took an EM field meter and a couple of other instruments, and I laid them on the ground in this area, which seemed to be about 20, 25 feet across, in the center of this area, and just backed up and started videotaping. And the compasses, the EM meter, are all swinging in 2-second pulses with absolute regularity. And when I then, several days later, found the cave and started surveying it, the cave is headed back in that direction. And the map of the cave that I have from Tony's diary indicates that the main passage is pretty well a straight line of travel. So I don't know. That's reaching, but what would be on this mountain that would be generating a 2-second pulse of what?
And is your suspicion that whatever this black glassy mirrored object might be, that it could be linked to some kind of technology that goes back at least 12,000 or more years?
Actually, and I can't believe that I even entertained these ideas. 10 years ago, I would have never considered some of this stuff, but the facts are the facts, and I think when you take everything into consideration, where and how this thing is located inside this mountain, it's 2,700 feet or so below the top of the mountain, 2 miles back in a cave, in the middle of nowhere. And with a prehistoric cave bear inside, the deposit over the cave bear, and something going on down to some greater distance, yes, you're looking, I think simply the configuration of the artifact indicates is definitely man-made. You don't find a thing like this in nature. And I think it is pretty clear, I've had a lot of caving experience, and I think it's pretty clear that this thing predated the cave, that the cave formations are formed on it, and the deposit is in it. And if it predates the cave, we're looking back a great deal beyond 11,000 years. So I talked to really one of the top geologists in the Czech Republic, without going into any details about the artifact, but about that particular area in the Tatra Mountains. And those mountains, suppose, for example, this thing was sitting there and predated the mountains and was caught up in the upheaval of the mountains and trapped inside, entombed in there, and then later, of course, the cave formed, as they will, under the right conditions. Those mountains were generated 67 million years ago.
On or about the time of the perhaps asteroid hit of the planet that did in the dinosaurs.
You're precisely right on. That's and I find that really fascinating. But I don't know, Linda. It's just incredible to even talk about. But I have been there, and it's there. There's just no question. It's a matter of getting to it. And my primary goal always has been to get to this thing, to establish that it is, as Tony said it was, and I have no doubt that it is. Then to very discreetly take in teams of 2 or 3 scientists. Surely you could talk scientists into taking a trip and looking at something, as opposed to trying to get them interested in other things that we deal with.
Right. And especially if there is still some kind of turbine or engine or something going on down below.
Yes. Yeah. That seems such an incredibly far-fetched story, but this was a guy that would have known. You know, I've sat in caves and I've heard really weird things that weren't even there. But I was able to sit there and rationalize that, look, this is not real. And this man had a lot more experience in the underground than I. And, you know, he had given it a lot of thought. And his goal was to be able to help a team get there and do the scientific research. And he didn't want it exploited. He talks in his diary about, I don't want tourists coming in, destroying the land and so on, and trying to blow the mountain up and get it out and so on. And so, you know, I'm just trying to follow what he wanted, his desires, and because I think it's the best approach.
Ted Phillips is now trying to organize a professional team of cave engineers and scientists who can travel with him back to the Slovakia cave to find that black cylindrical object. Ted has posted photographs from his 2001 trip at his website, www.cptr.us. And he welcomes hearing from anyone who might have more information about the Tatra mountain area, and to hear from anyone who might seriously be interested in contributing funds for what Ted hopes will be his third and finally successful research trip that he started with Dr. J. Allen Hynek and Antonin Horak in 1970.
Linda, I am barely able to talk because I'm still gathering my jaw up off the floor. That has to have been two of the most extraordinary stories. And folks, go to earthfiles.com to totally disconnected with all of this in 1994, going into the White House on September 11th. Then roll forward to September 11th, 2001, and that happens. Then we're talking about all of these other number 11s. Now, what are you saying here? Are you saying that there is somebody using the number 11 as a kind of code, or does it go deeper than that?
I think there's a few things going on, of course. One thing is that there is a twilight language, as I call it in the book, that really is beneath what is normally spoken to you as a reader of the media. In other words, 9/11 is important, but behind the 9/11 was September 11th, 1922, when Palestine began, or the Black September movement, which started really around September 11th in 1970. After the September 11th, 1994 situation, you had Ramses Yousef, who was involved with the Twin Towers bombing in 1993, really was the mastermind behind the destruction of the Philippines Flight 434 on December 11th, 1994, where he wanted to bomb. That was the first plot to bomb 11 planes, and that out of that. And of
course, 434 adds up to 11.
Yeah, and out of those plots and plans came 9/11, and it just keeps coming up. I show in the book how the Bali nightclub explosion really started on October 11th, 2002. 202 people died. October 11th was that's where they used 110 pounds of explosives. The Madrid situation was March 11th, and that was where you had the 911 days between 9/11 and March 11th, 2004. So for whatever reason, you have Flight 11 going into the Twin Towers, which are two situations that can be looked from far away as 11. I don't know what the significance is, and I'm not saying that I have all the answers. I'm just pointing to something goes on with anniversaries, with significant dates, and it becomes part of the copycat effect.
Now, I would like to talk a little Christian because of the fact that not because I'm not an evangelical Christian, and I don't approve very much of the type of Christianity that you see in the media today. To me, it feeds evil and is filled with hate. I see Christianity as having to do with trust in grace and living a life of forgiveness. But that's another story entirely. I do understand a lot about what Christ was as a being, and I understand why he would have been and why he would have been like that. I even pretty well understand why the image on the Shroud of Turin is likely to be an authentic side effect of the resurrection. Now, all of those things put aside, I wonder, and as I read your book, I began to sense, I can't articulate them, but I sensed patterns of meaning in my own mind, from my own experience of the incidents that you're talking about and of life, that seemed to me to imply the presence of a horrific plan that is where these dreadful images are put there like a kind of monstrous bait to draw us into a level of reality that we really should not go, that the way in which we look at evil in the world is making us evil. Now, I want you to comment on that, but not now, because now we have to take a little break. And folks, sure, I want you to think seriously about getting the Copycat Effect by Loren Coleman. This is important. This is not to be missed. This is to be thought about carefully, because this is, if there was ever a real lifeline to take you up out of a dark place that you don't even know you're in, here's one route out of the matrix, folks, the Copycat Effect. Okay, I'm telling you that. I'm guaranteeing you that. So get it, and please, get it in your bookstore. Get it anywhere. And if you have half a brain, get it from the unknowncountry.com store so this whole shebang can keep shebanging along. This is Whitley Strieber. It's Dreamland. We'll be right back. Subscribers, you're going to hear two commercials during this program for the unknowncountry.com Christmas store, which is now very eye-popping, mind-boggling one for me when I first opened the book.
Well, I think I want to really make people stand up and sit up, because right at the beginning of the book, I talk about an incident that I think a lot of people have forgotten. In 1994, on September 11th, a plane was stolen and actually used to crash into the White House. It's a date and an incident that people have forgotten. Because of that incident, a man had stolen a Cessna, taken off, flown over the Masonic Washington Monument, down the area there, and right into the White House. Because of that, and because it got so much media attention, for the next month you had 5 different incidents occurring at the White House, where there were different people shooting guns, invading it, climbing over the fences, and it really became something. So that 9/11 really 10 years ago now occurred. I also talk about 9/11 in other cases. I don't know if you want to get into those right now.
Sure, absolutely. I want to get into lots of cases. That's why we're here.
Okay.
I'm delighted.
Right. Well, I think what is intriguing is that if you look deeper and deeper at the significance of 11, for instance, the Madrid subway bombings occurred exactly with 911 days in between 9/11 and that date in which the bomb exploded in Madrid. And it was done with 11 different bombs with 110 pounds of dynamite. If you look at the background of the 9/11 situation, it occurred because the planning had happened in the Philippines, and it first started on December 11th, which they wanted to take 11 planes down. For whatever reason, 11 is significant in there, and it's almost as if the intelligence, we're all talking about the intelligence agencies making mistakes, but I think that there's probably been a lot out there about 11 that could have prevented or maybe predicted some of this stuff.
Okay, well, that gets me to a question, Loren, because I have to ask you, we're talking about the private plane, seemingly best way to put it. So, today we're going to do something very, very interesting. Loren Coleman, you remember Loren, of course, from Mysterious America, from his work on Bigfoot. We've had some fascinating sessions with Loren on Dreamland. Now, a departure for Loren Coleman, and a very, very important one. How the media and popular culture trigger the mayhem in tomorrow's headlines. This is the kind of on-target insight that we urgently need. You haven't seen any reviews of his book, The Copycat Effect. Of course not, because this book takes out a Sten gun and fires it at the media exactly, Loren, what the media is causing people to do to us, and they don't want us to think about that. They want us to continue to buy into this constant diet of violence and fright and fear that is actually taking our culture down. It's like having a noose around your neck these days to watch the news. How do you feel about that, Loren?
I think that's true. It's in the Copycat Effect, I really look at how the media has used death and near-death experiences graphically depicted on their television, on radio, to sell. And I think that if we look at that clearly, we can see that they are actually behind a lot of behavior contagion, murder, suicides, everything from the beheadings that we're reading about. I'm not blaming them, but I'm saying they're creating a culture where vulnerable people, where people that have homicidal intent, tend to get a lot of their ideas now from what they see 24/7 on the cable news.
And this goes a lot deeper, folks, than you would think. Now, when he said near-death, by the way, he wasn't referring to the type of near-death experiences we think about. He was referring to accidents and tragedies. Am I right about that, Loren?
Yes, indeed. I am talking about how if you turn on the news or look at any kind of media, it's about death or near-death. What I mean is hurricanes, tornadoes, even talk of influenza is really about whether or not you're going to die or live this winter.
Now, the book, let's talk a little bit about the 911 connection, which was kind of a little bit more about the Twilight language, because I was fascinated with this material here. And he says, you say this: Twilight language concerns from psychology the hidden significance of locations, dates, and other signs. From religious studies, the hidden symbolism that lies in the texture of the incidents. And from criminology, the profiling insights that have revealed the ritualistic nature of certain crimes and violent incidents. It's almost as if the unconscious has a language and a plan of life that it is enacting in some way that isn't necessarily obvious to us on the surface. Does that, I wanted to ask you that question specifically. Is that going kind of in the direction, a right direction, or do you think I'm kind of off base?
No, you definitely have captured it. What it talks about is the psychic driving that occurs when certain incidents that are in the media really key off people. This Twilight language is there. I mean, we can see it in Heaven's Gate, for instance, in which that occurred on, a lot of the cult killings, cult suicides happen on the equinox, on the solstice, really keyed into something that has more meaning to them than it does to the general public. So if you take yourself one step back, and in a broader sense, when a lot of this media violence is put out there on a screen in almost a brainwashing situation, it really keys into a Twilight language that has a different level of meaning to some people. Maybe they're called vulnerable, maybe they're called homicidal, but it certainly keys into almost a program. Maybe it's on a genetic level, maybe it's on a psychosocial level, whatever, that really creates violent situations that are driven along more and more by, seeing Columbine, seeing all the school shootings on TV.
Right.
It creates situations where people are copycatting in a very vivid way what's going on.
I wouldn't say exactly a believer in traditional spirits, like things like the devil and so forth, but I do sense the very definite presence of these forces, both dark and light, and I'm a